Just the word carried enough weight to strike fear into the hearts of captains and kings alike. It was not just disobedience. It was treason in its purest form, a betrayal that could overturn the iron order of empires and drag every man aboard into blood, chaos, and death. But here's the question that has haunted historians for centuries. Why would sailors, men who knew the punishments, men who lived under the shadow of the noose, still risk everything to rebel? To answer that, we need to step into the creaking wooden decks of the great age of sail, where the sea was both prison and battlefield, and where mutiny became the most dangerous gamble a sailor could make. Life aboard a ship in the 17th and 18th centuries was unlike anything on land. A vessel wasn't just transport, it was a world sealed off by miles of ocean. For weeks or months, men lived in suffocating closeness, sweat, tar, salt, and fear mixing into the very air they breathed. Every plank, every rope, every gust of wind meant life or death. And that fragile order was maintained by discipline sharper than any blade. Captains were not just commanders, they were kings of floating kingdoms. Their word was law, their authority absolutely. Disobedience to an order wasn't a mistake, it was heresy. Why? Because if even one man faltered, the ship could fall apart in a storm, or drift helplessly into enemy hands. This is why captains carried whips, chains, and the dreaded cat-o'-nine-tails, a whip that tore flesh with each strike. Sailors endured punishments that left scars on their backs and souls. Fear was the glue that held ships together. Yet fear, when pushed too far, becomes fuel for rebellion. Imagine it. You've been at sea for 3 months, eating nothing but salted meat, crawling with maggots, drinking water that tastes of rot. You've slept in a hammock barely wide enough to keep you from falling to the floor. Your clothes never dry, your body stinking of salt and sweat. Above you are a captain who dines on fresh bread and wine while you chew hard biscuits that break your teeth. When storms hit, it's you hauling ropes through freezing rain, your hands bleeding raw. When sickness spreads, it's your friends tossed overboard without ceremony, and then one day the captain strikes a man too many, or withholds food from starving mouths, or sails the crew into battle for his glory rather than their survival. That is the spark. That is the breaking point. Mutinies were rare, but when they came, they exploded with the force of cannon fire. And no mutiny is more infamous than the one aboard HMS Bounty in 1789. The Bounty had sailed to the South Pacific, tasked with gathering breadfruit trees. But beneath the tropical skies, paradise clashed with discipline. Captain William Bligh ruled with iron severity, cutting rations, punishing harshly, demanding absolute loyalty. For the sailors, the Tahitian Islands had shown them another life, a glimpse of freedom, warmth, and humanity they never knew aboard a British vessel. When they set sail again, with paradise fading behind them, resentment boiled. Led by Fletcher Christian, the crew rose in the night. Bligh and his loyalists were cast adrift in a small open boat, left to the mercy of the sea. Against all odds, Bligh survived a 3,600-mile voyage across the Pacific, a feat of seamanship still admired today. But the mutineers? They scattered to islands, hunted by the empire they had betrayed. Some built lives in hidden covers, others were captured and hanged. Bounty's mutiny was more than just rebellion. It was a clash between two worlds, the rigid steel of naval authority and the human longing for freedom. To governments and admirals, mutiny was not just a crime, it was a contagion. If one crew rose against its captain, what stopped others from doing the same? Empires relied on their navies to secure trade routes, conquer territories, and project power across the globe. Ships were the sharp edge of empire. But they were also fragile floating fortresses manned by men who could turn their guns inward. This fear came to life in the Great Mutinies of 1797, when thousands of sailors in the British Navy rose at Spithead and the Nore. They weren't just angry at captains, they were demanding better pay, fair treatment, and an end to brutal punishments. The mutiny spread like fire, shaking the entire empire. Admirals feared the Navy itself, the backbone of Britain's power, might collapse from within. Though some demands were met, leaders of the uprisings were executed. The lesson was clear. Mutiny might win concessions, but the price was blood. For sailors, Mutiny was always a gamble with death. If you failed, you were flogged, hanged, or chained until disease finished you. If you succeeded, you might live free for a while, but the empire never forgot. Naval hunters would pursue you across oceans, and betrayal by your own men was always a risk. And yet sailors kept rebelling. Why? Because to many, death seemed better than another day under the lash. Here lies the heart of mutiny. It wasn't just about food or pay. It was about dignity. About men who, beaten and starved, chose to seize their fate rather than surrender their humanity. Mutiny as a mirror of humanity. When we study these rebellions, we see more than just history. We see a mirror. Every mutiny tells us something about power and resistance, about the line between authority and cruelty. On land, revolutions reshaped nations. At sea, mutiny was the revolution of the desperate. A rebellion fought not with banners and speeches, but with knives in the dark, with captains bound in their cabins, with cannons turned against their masters. It reminds us that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit strains against chains, that the hunger for freedom, no matter the risks, will always burn. So what was mutiny at sea? It was the nightmare of captains, the terror of kings, and the gamble of desperate men. It was rare, but its echoes resounded across empires. Some mutineers died in disgrace. Others found hidden islands to build new lives. And some, like those on the Bounty, entered legend. But behind every story is the same truth. When authority pushed too far, when men were treated as tools instead of souls, they rose. And though history often paints them as traitors, mutiny forces us to ask, who were the real betrayers? The sailors who demanded dignity, or the rulers who denied it? Perhaps that is why the word still chills us. Because mutiny is not just a story of the past. It is the timeless reminder that power, no matter how absolute, is never safe from those who refuse to bow.